on Zoom and Facebook Live almost here today, Monday, the 4th of May, el 4 de Mayo. May the 4th be with you. And this is our first food demonstration, and it's a special guest that we have today. Our first special guest is Jimena Martin. She is the Senior Director of Programming and Education at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. I'll get it right, Cultura y Artes. And she brings all of the programming that we have year after year. It was going to be 80 plus in 2020. As you know, we have the concerts, the platicas, the food demos, the panel discussions, all that fun stuff, all the serious stuff that is important to our community. Unfortunately, we are closed and we don't know when we're going to start it up again, but for now, we're bringing it to you. So I'm going to leave it to Jimena now to introduce our today's session participant. Go ahead, Jimena, it's all yours.
Thank you, Everaldo, for the introductions. And I'm so excited to have Jocelyn Ramirez here to kick off our cooking series. A lot of good stuff. LA Times with the Bill Addison book, To Feed the Soul. Her book was highlighted. I bought my book not too long ago, was fortunate to take one of her classes online. I hope she still continues on. She'll let us know more. But she is also many things. She, Todo Verde started in 2015, started with a mission of plant-based food inspired by Mexican and Latin American roots, an advocate for healthy food and access to her community. She's going to do a beautiful jackfruit dish and also teach us how to do a delicious pepián sauce. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us. And now I pass it on to the kitchen to Jocelyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be a part of this virtual La Plaza space. As we were talking about briefly before starting, I have taught at La Plaza in person. And so it's nice to still be included in this virtual space and be able to share some of these recipes. And also, as Jimena mentioned, I just released my plant-based cookbook, La Vida Verde, just a few weeks ago. Good timing, bad timing, who knows? But it's all kind of going. And I'm going to be cooking a recipe of pipián rojo that is on page 80. And so if you do happen to have the book in front of you and want to kind of scroll through it and maybe take some notes as we're going along, feel free to do so. And pipián rojo is a regional dish from where my family is from. My abuelita and her entire family is from Montescobedo, Mexico. And so growing up, eating her pipián rojo with chicken in it was a very, very traditional special dish that she made from time to time. And so as I decided, to go plant-based, I still wanted to be able to recreate her recipe of pipián rojo. But instead, I ended up swapping out chicken for jackfruit. So I'll show you this pretty simple recipe that anybody can do at home. And I'll be making it in a taco versus over rice the way it's pictured in the book. So I'm gonna just scoot this back. I'm gonna bring over my star ingredient here, which is jackfruit. And so for people who are not very familiar with jackfruit, it is a fruit that is grown in tropical areas, typically in Asia or in Mexico. It grows on trees. It's as big as a watermelon with green spikes all over it. And it is a very delicious tropical sweet fruit when it ripens. But when you purchase it this way, which is called young green jackfruit, it means that it hasn't developed any of the sugars in the fruit yet. And so you're able to break it down and shred it up and cook it in a savory dish. And you can see here how some of it just kind of shreds up like a chicken or a pork. It easily shreds apart in your hands. And the way that you can typically find it here in the US is either canned or in pouches in a brine. And so I actually use a canned jackfruit, and let me get a piece of it so you can see it as well. So I used a canned jackfruit for this recipe in a brine. This one came from Thailand. It typically comes in this shape, and the way that it kind of comes apart is that this top portion is that shreddy part that I'm talking about, that just shreds in your hand very easily. But then you'll notice here that from this line down, this triangle portion, if I try to break it up, I mean, it doesn't shred at all. It's pretty much like just a chunk of jackfruit. And so what I am gonna just briefly demonstrate, which I've already done for most of my jackfruit here, is I'm gonna show you just how I use a knife to cut off the core piece from the top area of the jackfruit. And then I use my knife to mince this up, because I know people who have used jackfruit sometimes will toss this away in the trash, when in reality, this tastes just like every bit of the jackfruit. It tastes the same. It's a very neutral flavor, which is why it's such a great ingredient to use for something like this, because it doesn't really have too much of a flavor, so it'll take on any flavor that you give it. So when it came in this brine or this liquid, you know, it was soaking in it. So I'm over here over my sink. I'm just going to use my hands to just squeeze out all the liquid I can. And so I'm just pressing it in between my two palms and trying to squeeze out as much of that liquid. And then I'll transfer that squeezed jackfruit to my cutting board. Let me just rinse my hands here.
Jocelyn, we got our first question.
Yeah.
It's Lola.
Oh, Lola.
She says,
Hi.
my jackfruit always comes out super tangy. Is there a way to reduce the tanginess? I get the canned jackfruit in brine.
Yeah, so the way that you can reduce some of that tanginess with the jackfruit and the brine, it'll be another step, but it's definitely not difficult. All you have to do is, I like to take it out of the brine. So put it in, you know, toss my jackfruit into a strainer, let it strain through, rinse it really well, and then I'll squeeze all the liquid out, just as I did, and then I'll put it into a container with water and let it sit in that container with water, maybe overnight or a couple hours, and that will continue to allow that brine to seep out of the jackfruit. And then I'll strain it again and squeeze it again. And so that additional step typically tends to get most of that tanginess from the brine out of it. And if you squeeze it pretty well, actually, I'm not sure, Lola, if you're squeezing it when you do take it out of the can. I know some people just get right into chopping it up. But the reason I squeeze it is to try to get as much of that out so that my jackfruit can focus on absorbing the flavors that I'm going to show you right now, in what I'm putting in this dish, versus really keeping a hold of that briny flavor from the can. So I have a few pieces here that you see, because I squeezed them, they're a little funky looking now. They don't look like those nice triangles. And so here for this piece, you'll notice that it has the core, which is not shreddable. It's kind of a semi-firm piece of jackfruit, and I'm just going to use my knife to remove that, and I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to create a pile of them on my cutting board, and I'm also going to check this shreddable area of the jackfruit just to make sure. Sometimes there's these seed pods like this one. So here for this piece, you'll notice that it has the core. I could hear a feedback. I think that's Abelardo's feedback of me from the Facebook Live. I was like, somebody's talking, it's me.
Okay, I took it down. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. Okay, so I am going to remove that seed pod. And so pretty much I'm creating two piles, a pile that's ready to go of the shreddable jackfruit and a pile that still needs to get minced up. And so I'll keep going through for these few, and see how here I have the seed that came out of the shreddy bits. So I'll go ahead and keep going through. I think I just have 4 or 5 pieces here. So again, and the reason I'm removing this, you know, this like seed pod, mostly is for aesthetics, because I want this to look as much as possible like a meat dish. And when it has these like big round seeds in there, it looks odd. It just looks like, oh, that's not meat, that's something else. What is it? And so I really like to try to get my jackfruit as close to that consistency of a meat as possible. So this one seems good to go. It has a little seed pod here, and I'm really like finicky about mine. I like to get all those seed pods out as much as possible. If you're in a rush, obviously you don't have to do this, especially if you're eating it yourself and you don't mind. But especially if I'm feeding it to other people, I like to really make sure that I'm mincing everything up really well. So I'm going to bring back my bowl, and I'm going to just toss this jackfruit that's pretty much ready to go into my bowl. And then I'm gonna bring this jackfruit that is still the seed pods and the cores, and I'm just gonna bring my fingers, quick knife skills. I'm gonna pinch the base of my blade here with my index finger and my thumb. I'm gonna wrap my other fingers around the handle. I'm either gonna pinch the top of my blade with my other hand, or I'm gonna do flat fingers on top of the blade, just so you don't cut yourself, obviously. And I'm just gonna run my knife through this jackfruit. And you can mince it as finely as you want. Pretty much what I'm looking for is just something that starts to kind of blend into the shreddy jackfruit that looks like a meat when it's cooking. So like, obviously like this won't blend in, right? This big old chunk. But those might, you know, those little pieces might. So I just want to get it down to that consistency so that it's just kind of aesthetically a little bit more pleasing to the eye. I have had jackfruit dishes at some other vegan vendors, and the flavor is delicious, but they literally just open the can and they throw in the whole jackfruit. Like they don't even break off, like cut off the core here like I'm doing, and then separate it from the shreddable parts. And then, so it's just like one huge chunk of jackfruit that you're like chewing into. So this is what it should look like at the end of the day. It's not perfect, but good enough, just minced up enough. And again, this is not trash, right? I've heard from a lot of people that they've been throwing that away for years because they didn't know what to do with it, because they mostly wanted the shreddable parts of the jackfruit. So we want to make sure that we have as less food waste as possible. I'm going to put my knife there so it's safe. And then I'm going to just use my fingers to shred up any of these bits of jackfruit that are still kind of big. So any of these like big pieces, I'm just quickly gonna just run my fingers through it, try to break it down. And the reason is because I just wanna make sure that all my seasoning and what I'm gonna use to cook the jackfruit gets into all these little crevices versus just coating the exterior of the big chunk of jackfruit. And then when you actually bite into it, there's not really much flavor there. So I'm just really trying to make sure that I incorporate my flavor throughout my jackfruit dish. So I think I pretty much got most of it, and I can keep doing this with the back of the spatula or the spoon as it's cooking. And I don't know if anyone is cooking along, but I also have a skillet behind me that's preheating on my stove, just so that when I'm ready to throw it on there, it's already nice and heated up. So I'm just gonna give my hands another quick rinse here because they're covered in jackfruit. Okay, and I wanna just show you all the ingredients that I have here. Some of them are for the jackfruit, some of them are for the pipián. But I have here these two will be for the jackfruit that I'm preparing right now, which is just a couple tablespoons of cumin. I'm like, let me bring my book, because sometimes I eyeball things and I want to make sure I'm going exactly off of the recipe that I have written here. So I have 2 tablespoons of ground cumin, which brings like a nice earthy, smoky flavor to the jackfruit. And then I have 3/4 of a teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, a little bit of chilito to spice it up. And then I just have a little bit of fresh ground pepper, black pepper that I have there. And then the salt that I'll be using today is a coarse kosher salt. And so the salt, it will be to taste depending on what type of salt that you have. I always like to mention that not all salts are created equal, so some are more salty than others. This one I find to be a medium saltiness. If you're using a pink Himalayan, that's less salty. If you're using fine table salt, more salty. So work with what you have and kind of adjust. So start slow and low with your salt and then adjust. And then I'm also going to be adding a 1/2 cup of cooking oil to my jackfruit, mostly because, like I mentioned, jackfruit is a fruit and it doesn't have any fat content like a meat would. And so we need to incorporate that as it cooks. It needs a little bit of that fat.
Jocelyn,
And then yeah.
I'm sorry. We have another question by Aurora Luna.
Yeah.
She asked, can you use a fresh jackfruit instead?
So fresh jackfruit you can find typically in Asian markets in Los Angeles. The only thing though is that they're typically sweet because by the time they travel from wherever they're grown to the US, they tend to ripen. So it's very rare that you'd be able to find a young green jackfruit fresh here in the US. Again, you'll typically find it canned or in a pouch, in a vacuum sealed pouch.
Let me ask you two more things before you get rolling along here.
Yeah.
Do you recommend using avocado oil?
You can use avocado oil, any oil that has a higher heat capacity. So the one that I'm using is a grapeseed oil. At the kitchen, we typically use organic rice bran oil, which isn't so commonly found in regular stores just yet. I don't recommend olive oil just because it doesn't, because olive oil has like little particles in it that burn easily. It can't withstand a high temperature, and you're gonna cook this for about 20-25 minutes or so. And so you just want to use something that can withstand that temperature.
Okay, that was from Jacqueline. And then you answered Sara Lisa. She also asked what type of oil you're using.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I used a rice bran oil. So I have my jackfruit here, and I'm just gonna sprinkle on my spices, my crushed red pepper flakes, my cumin. So I have that. And then I'm going to add here my rice bran oil. And I am going to use my spatula to scrape that down just to make sure I get all of it into here. And typically when I cook other jackfruits, this one's gonna end up going in a sauce. So even if, you know, you see a little bit of drying of your jackfruit as it's cooking, because again, it doesn't have any fat content in it. So what I like to do when I'm cooking, like for example, the jackfruit carnitas, is that I add more oil as it's cooking. So I add a little bit to kind of marinate it or toss it in the seasoning. And then as it's cooking, I continue to add more. This one's gonna end up with the sauce over it. So it's a little bit of a different style of a jackfruit that doesn't require as much of an oil. All right, so all I'm doing is I'm just incorporating all that seasoning throughout my jackfruit here, making sure that I'm folding it all together and that every little bit is coated with some of that seasoning. And then I have, like I mentioned, my preheated skillet here, which I am going to move this cutting board so I can bring you a bit closer. There we go. Let me turn that up slightly. And I'm gonna just toss this into, I'm using a cast iron skillet, and I'm just gonna toss it into the skillet here. So I have a very light sizzle. It's preheated, but I didn't have it super hot. And the thing with jackfruit, for folks who are familiar with this ingredient, is that you want to cook it at a high enough temperature where you're getting a little crisp on it, that it's browning, but obviously not hot enough where it's over drying the jackfruit, like some of the oil is evaporating or cooking off, and then you're getting kind of like a burnt dry jackfruit. So it's about a medium heat that you want to cook it at. So I have my jackfruit here that I will keep an eye on. I'm actually going to end up putting this on the back burner and keeping an eye on it. And to the front burner, I'm going to bring just a stainless steel, another pan that I have where I'm going to toast my pepitas for my pipián. So I want to talk a little bit about pipián in general, because some people are like, what's the difference between pipián and mole? That's a very common question. And, really the main difference is that, a pipián, typically the main ingredient is going to be pepitas or pumpkin seeds. And so this is pretty much the star of your dish here. And when it comes to a mole, you have, so many ingredients that go into a mole, sometimes up to 20, 30 ingredients. With the pipián, it's slightly simplified in that, again, you have these toasted pepitas that are really the star. Usually in the pipián rojo, you'll have guajillo chiles, onion, garlic. Sometimes people add tomato to it. You'll have a vegetable broth. And for a pipián verde, which is another one that we make with Todo Verde, I'm gonna throw these in my preheated pan to start toasting as I talk. And what's important here is to keep it moving, right? So don't just let those sit there, but you have to keep moving them along so that they don't burn and they cook evenly. But for, pipián verde, what we use in Todo Verde's recipe, which is also in the cookbook, is toasted pepitas as well as toasted pistachios. And we fire roast poblanos and jalapenos, and that becomes our pipián base. My family personally doesn't add tomatoes to their pipián rojo, so it's not included in this recipe. But if that is something that sounds delicious to you, adding some fire roasted tomatoes or roasted tomatoes to this dish, then by all means, you can always add that in there as well. So I'm gonna toast these pepitas. As you notice, like they're just like really vibrant green right now. And by the time we're done, I could already feel that they're hot. And by the time that these are done, there'll be a toasty shade of brown, still green, but a little shade of brown. And they'll also puff up slightly. And they make this crackling sound that, you know, even after you take them off the heat, they'll continue to kind of crackle and continue to puff up. And the crackling is happening because the shape of the pepita is changing. They're going through growing pains, you know? And along with my pepitas that are toasting here, after I'm done using this this pan to toast the pepitas, which I mentioned are in a dry pan. So I'll show you here that there's no liquid, there's no oil in here. And you can see some of them already kind of hopping around. I could smell that they're already becoming really fragrant and toasty. They're starting to dance in there. I might lower the heat slightly because I don't want any of them to pop out of the pan. I don't want this to be too hot. And again, really important to just keep moving them along so that they cook evenly and you don't have one that's really burnt on the bottom and then super raw on the other side. So let me keep working with those. And the other ingredients that I'm gonna be using in my pipián sauce for today is a quarter of an onion. I'm using a red onion. The recipe calls for a yellow onion, but red is fine. That's what I had on hand. And then it calls for 2 garlic cloves, which you're not gonna believe it, but I used my last 2 garlic cloves for lunch today. And then as I was like getting all my ingredients together, I was like, oh my God, I forgot I was supposed to keep those aside. But if you have your garlic cloves, you can definitely include that for a little bit more flavor. And so once these pepitas are done toasting, I'm going to add a little drizzle of oil to my pan. And then I'm going to pan fry my onion that I have. I have a quarter of a red onion that I mentioned. And then I have 6 guajillo chiles that I already took the stem off of the chiles. I took some of the seeds out of the chiles, and then I also gave them a rinse. Any other questions coming through so far for anyone?
Tell us how you got started with Todo Verde. How did it all begin? What was your journey?
Yeah. I mean, I started Todo Verde back in 2015, mostly because, you know, I was dealing with a lot of health issues within my family. I had a thyroid issue that I had been trying to heal with food. And I just felt like, you know, food was really the way that I was going to be able to take control of what was happening with my body. And, you know, the really big trigger was that my dad was diagnosed with cancer a second time. My mom then got diagnosed with high blood pressure. My dad had diabetes since I was in middle school. And I was just like, wow, this is a lot of preventable things. Like, why are we dealing with all of this? And I wondered if, you know, people in other areas of the city were dealing with the same. And so, you know, my solution was to become a solution for somebody else potentially, or to like be a part of the change that could potentially happen with communities of color throughout city of LA. Let me show you real quick how these pepitas are looking as I lower that heat for a moment.
Yeah. After you show us, we have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
It just came in, just over. From Aurora Luna, it says, ask, can you add red corn?
Red corn, that's a good ingredient to add. So this would just be cooked red corn, like nixtamal red corn. If so, I mean, that could be really delicious in there. I'm gonna just show you how these pepitas, I'm gonna take them off the heat. At this point, you can see that they've lightly browned. They're still green. They're still gonna keep cooking slightly. I'm just gonna put them in this little sheet here to spread out.
Since you're talking about the pepitas, we have another question by Johanna Mendoza. What is the amount of pepitas that you used today?
I used a half a cup of pepitas. So I used a half a cup of pepitas, and for the jackfruit, I used 2 20-ounce cans of jackfruit. So I have 2 cans of jackfruit that I'm cooking along here, and I got to remember to keep my eye on it because I was already forgetting about it, talking about my story. Let me make sure that it's just all getting well incorporated. I'm actually going to add another little drizzle of oil to my jackfruit and lower the temperature slightly. The reason I'm doing that is just because I had it just a little too high, and I want to make sure that I have enough of this like liquid in here, this oil, to allow it to keep crisping up and browning evenly and not drying out. So I'll show you the jackfruit in a moment. I'll give it just another couple minutes, but in that meantime, I'm going to add a little drizzle of oil to this pan that I mentioned. And can you hear this if I put this up to my ear? I don't know if you could hear the little popping there.
No.
But no, oh, I wish you could. It's just a little crackling of the pepitas that are still continuing to cook, even as they cool down. So add a little bit of oil in here. My pan is really hot. Because it's really hot, my chiles are gonna cook really quickly. I'm going to add, and you know, one thing I didn't add to my jackfruit, did I? I don't think I did. I didn't add salt. I talked about the salt, but I didn't add salt. So I'm gonna sprinkle salt on here into my jackfruit. I'll mix that up in a second. Let me add my cebolla. I have a quarter of a red onion here that I'm gonna add to my pan. And it's immediately sizzling. And I'm gonna just let that cook and soften slightly. And I'm gonna add my chiles. And I have 6 guajillo chiles here. Like I mentioned, I took the top off, the stem off, and I took the seeds out. These are gonna cook really fast. And what I'm looking for, I can hear them sizzling, they're popping. I'm gonna use some tongs here, which you could use your hands, tongs, to just flip them. And essentially what I'm looking for here with my chiles, let me hold this like this, is I'm looking for a little bit of, not a blackened chile, and some of these guajillos are darker than others. But what I want is to start to see, like you can start to see that chile there is starting to lightly blacken. And that's what I'm looking for. Ooh, and the chiles already got me. Woo, I got the back of my throat there. Okay. So I'll show you what these look like in just a moment. And so it's just like a quick pan frying of the chiles, just enough to, essentially what you're doing is you're trying to get them to release some of their flavor, become aromatic. They've been dried for a while. And so you want them to just become a really fragrant, delicious chile. And then once these are done pan frying, I have here 2 cups of vegetable broth that I'm going to soak them in. And so this is going to, ooh, it's really getting in the back of my throat here. See, and this is when you know it's like abuelita vibes in the house, right? Like my abuelita would always like be roasting chiles and we'd all come into the kitchen and start coughing and she'd always laugh at us. But this is just what our houses were like when people were like asando los chiles, you know? So this vegetable broth is gonna be used to rehydrate these guajillo chiles.
Do you have a quick recipe for the vegetable broth to share?
Yeah, so one quick one that I did for one of my classes recently, actually was my Todo Verde class, was I had some dried shiitakes, dried porcini mushrooms, some konbu, and some celery and carrot tops that I had from my compost, essentially, or before going to compost. And I added enough liquid to those and let it cook for about an hour. And so it essentially reduced by about half, the liquid did. And the flavor was just so delicious. I ended up adding the rehydrated mushrooms into my pozole, which were like a really, really nice additional flavor point for the pozole. But that's a quick and simple one. Like I always have dried mushrooms on hand. If you don't have dried mushrooms, you could just use like other veggies that, like sometimes people don't like to use the stems of their cilantro, for example, in a salsa or something like that. So you could use the stems in a broth. You could use carrot tops, so like the very top of a carrot that you cut off, you can use that. Celery, you can use potatoes, like any other flavors that are going to give you like a nice depth, or any food scraps that you have.
Yeah.
Okay, so these chiles I'm going to go ahead and take out. They're slightly blackening. They are going to be a nice flavor point in my pipián.
I have another quick question from Anari Rivera. Would you add the garlic to the chiles and onion?
Yeah, you can add it all in the same pan. So if I had my garlic that I didn't eat for lunch today, it would be in the same pan with a little bit of oil to coat it. Check out my onion there so far. So I have a nice blackening of my onion so far. I'm going to flip it over to the other side of the wedge here just to continue to cook it. And I can see that my onion is slowly starting to soften and cook through as well. So again, this is all meant like kind of like when you're cooking a salsa, right? You usually include onion, garlic, some chile, maybe like a jalapeno. You add it to a little pan with a little bit of oil, or maybe directly onto the flame of your stove. And you let it slightly blacken, and this increases the flavor. It releases some of the flavor of the ingredient that you're using. And it just makes the salsa shine so much more than if you were just adding a raw onion, a raw garlic clove, raw chiles to your dish. So I have my chiles in this broth, and let me lower this so you can see a little bit more. And really what I want to try to do is make sure that as much of them are in the broth as possible. And this is going to be the broth that we're going to end up using to blend up our pipián rojo. So it's already going to have some of that flavor of the rehydrated chiles in this dish. If yours are really floating or not settling well into the liquid, you can always add another bowl on top to just sit on them and keep them down into the liquid. And when I start blending my pipián rojo, I won't start off with using all of this water right away or all of this liquid right away. I'll start off with using a little more than half, and I add more as needed. Reason being is you might have big guajillo chiles, smaller ones, even though I, try to mention sizes or dimensions of certain things. If your chiles are a lot bigger, you're going to need all this liquid for it to become a pretty nice, smooth pipián sauce. You might even need to add more water aside from this, or more liquid. If your chiles are small and you add all this liquid, it might become too liquidy. So it's, finding that in between here. Let me check my jackfruit once again. Again, I keep forgetting about it, but it's doing okay back here. And let me show you what it looks like. So my jackfruit is starting to brown up. I keep going in with my spatula, trying to break it down lightly, trying to toss it, and you can see that it's browning. I let it blacken a little bit too much, but it'll be okay because when it gets in the sauce, it'll all get nice and coated and it'll mask some of that. But essentially what I'm looking for is a little bit of like brown crispiness in this jackfruit. I can see that there's still a good little amount of oil in the bottom of the pan that's helping it along so that it can brown. And I just want to keep mixing it because the jackfruit on top is not directly touching the heat, and I want to make sure that I get every little last bit nice and brown. So this is almost there. And then for the chiles, I'm just going to let those soak for just a couple more minutes. And then what I'll end up doing is I have a Vitamix that I'm going to use. And so I love my Vitamix. I'm like hugging it. I love my Vitamix just because it's so powerful. You know, it has a tamper that helps you like push down ingredients and scrape the sides of your blender. It's also just a very high power blender. So it'll blend my pipián sauce until it's like fairly smooth. While that like aromatics of the chiles are still getting me. I'm gonna turn on this fan here. Let me get some more water.
Yeah. It's a great investment. Once you buy one, they last forever.
Yeah, like some of them have a warranty of 7 years.
Yeah.
So they do last quite a while. It is definitely a good investment. You know, for many years I had a home blender at home, and just nothing compares to a Vitamix.
Yeah.
It will break down anything and like make it super smooth and creamy as long as there's enough liquid inside of the blender to help it along.
It's amazing with kale.
It is.
It's like nothing else does it.
Okay, so what I'll end up doing is I'm gonna remove my onion in just a moment, and I'll end up adding all the elements of my pipián sauce, which were the pepitas that we toasted, the chiles that we pan fried, the liquid that they're soaking in, not all of it. I'll add some of it at first, check out the consistency, and add more as needed. And then I'm gonna add the onion, and if you're also using garlic, you would add the garlic at that point as well. Let me check my onion here. Yeah. So my onion is getting a nice, it's already starting to fall apart, which when you know it's like getting really cooked through here. So I'm gonna just turn off the heat for my onion now and let it sit there as I start to put in my other ingredients. And then the other last thing that I'll hit it with is obviously salt, just to give it that seasoning that it needs. And then the jackfruit has, again, that cumin, the chili flakes, a few other elements that'll give it a nice little flavor in the background of this dish.
I have another question for you from
Yeah.
Emma Martinez. She says, why is the onion not cut smaller?
It could be, but the reason is I want the onion to soften up and cook through. If it were cut into smaller pieces, you'd get more blackening all around and like different edges of the onion. You know, if you did cook it where you like slice the onion, for example, I would just cook it at a lower temperature so that it doesn't dry out or burn your onion, so that it kind of sweats the onion slightly.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to add my ½ cup of toasted pepitas to this blender. And I had them on this sheet here so they can start to cool off. And I'll add them all here, trying to not drop any. And then I'm going to add my chiles. I'm gonna grab my tongs here, take my chiles, which have softened up because they've been sitting in this liquid, and add them here. Add some of the liquid. I'll leave a little bit aside just in case I need it. I'm leaving about a quarter to ½ a cup here, maybe like a third of a cup. And then the last thing I'll add is my onion that has been roasted. And again, if you have garlic that you're also roasting, you would add that here too. And last thing that I won't forget for this round is my salt. And I'm gonna add a couple pinches of salt, and then I'll taste it to see if it needs any more salt. And I'm gonna go over to my Vitamix blender here and blend it up. There we go. And the color that'll come out of this is gonna be like a brick red color. No, let's do. Okay.
Jocelyn, I have another question. Okay, this is from Maria Arias. My mom too is from Zacatecas, but she only ever made pipián with just potato and the sauce. Have you ever added papa to this recipe? And what was the outcome or recommendations you might have for that?
So I have seen papa. My mom has made it with papa before. In Zacatecas, there are these little papitas. They're little round ones, which is probably the ones that her mom used that grow there. And that's a very, very common ingredient in this dish. So yes, absolutely. If you have papas, because that's the thing that you grew up eating it with and you want to cook it with that, absolutely. It's so delicious with everything. So right now that I blended it, right now I'm checking to try to see if I got most of the chile blended down. The consistency that I see here is still a little lumpy. It's not as smooth as I want it. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of my liquid to it just to make sure that it gets nice and smooth. And then I'll taste to see if it needs more salt. And it's very, very strong on the pepito side, which is so good. I'm gonna add a little bit more salt, another couple pinches of salt here, and then I'll add my remaining liquid. And one thing to keep in mind here, if you make your pipián and it comes out a little bit too liquidy, two things you can do. You can either add it to heat. So if I added it to my jackfruit, which let me check on, by the way, if I add it to my jackfruit, it will thicken up slightly because of the temperature of the jackfruit in the dish. And the other thing is that you can always char a tortilla on your stove, and you can add the charred tortilla to the blender to thicken up your pipián sauce if it's just too liquidy. I'm gonna bring my jackfruit back to the front of my stove, the front burner here. All my little jackfruit pieces that didn't make it. All right, so I'm gonna blend this once again. Keep those questions coming in.
Yes, I just got a question by John Echeveste, our CEO at La Plaza, big fan as well. Where can we buy the book? You can get a signed copy directly from Jocelyn at todoverde.org. If you go on her website, you can order there and she can send you a personalized copy.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're doing Mother's Day bundles actually, because some people have been wondering, where do I get ingredients like jackfruit, nutritional yeast, raw cashew pieces for our cheeses, agar-agar. These are all, ingredients that are commonly used in plant-based menus. And so the bundle that we're gonna be sending out is a personalized signed copy of the book with 8 other ingredients that people can use to make some of the recipes in the book, including black rice, chia seeds, nutritional yeast, raw cashews, agar-agar. All right, so I'm seeing here, I think you saw that dripping. I want something that's like kind of thick and holds up, but also it is pretty smooth. I might even add just a little bit more liquid to this, but you can kind of see here a little bit of that consistency of the pipián. I'm gonna add just a little bit more of liquid. I'm gonna grab my vegetable broth, which I actually used a pre-purchased vegetable broth. Just gonna add a splash in there and just blend it through one more time. And surprisingly enough, even with those pinches of salt, it could even use a little bit more salt. So this is what's important about, there's my couple splashes. What's important about adding salt little by little is that you can adjust it as needed without over salting. Because once you over salt, you can't take that back, right? But I can keep adding as needed. Okay, last blend here, and then I'm gonna add it to my jackfruit. And I'm just blending enough to incorporate, but it's pretty smooth so far. All right, let me give this one last taste. And that is on point there now. It has enough salt. The consistency is a little bit smoother. It's just what I'm looking for. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring you all to my stove now. So you can see a little bit more closely what I'm doing.
I have another question, Jocelyn, from Jacqueline Villadares. Which vegetable broth do you use?
The one that I was just using, I either got it at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. It's just the low sodium vegetable broth. And that's just something that I have in my cupboard if I'm just like, oh, I want to make a quick soup and I don't have veggie stock already on hand that I maybe made before. But yeah, I just use the low sodium. I like to have as much control as I can over like how much salt and anything else that I put in my food, which is why I typically reach for the low sodium one.
What's good about the vegetable broth, the new type of broth, you can make on a Sunday a big batch. And
Yes.
containers, and you could mark them up with the date and put them in your freezer.
Absolutely.
So whenever you have need to make that soup or to add for pepián or any other sauce that needs caldo, any soup-based broth, it's in your freezer, and it's made exactly the way how you like it with the salt and all.
Yeah, exactly. And you know that the veggies were veggies that you likely purchased. Like I purchased my veggies from the farmer's market. So I know that the veggies are like super fresh, grown locally, and I'm trying to do my part in supporting the ecosystem, right? So, you know, not only am I trying to purchase locally, trying to purchase organic when possible, but also playing my role in like creating less food waste. So all those little bits, they're either going to be compost or they're going to be a broth. And I compost at a local garden close to where I live. And hopefully I'm waiting to hear back. We'll be able to get my garden plot there because I have no green space where I live right now. And so I'm trying to get back into growing some more of my own food. So I'm using my spatula here and trying to scrape out as much of this pipián as possible into the same pan here as my jackfruit. And all I really want to do at this point is mix it well, make sure that all that jackfruit is coated with the pipián, and just make sure that the pipián gets warmed through, that it comes to a temperature, heat or temperature that I want to get ready to eat this. Essentially, it's almost there. And check out that lovely red brick color, right? And then all I'm gonna do is just fold this into my jackfruit. And again, it'll slightly thicken if you leave it on the heat for a little bit of time.
Jocelyn, can I make either of these things the night before, like make the pepián the night before as well, and then maybe cook up the jackfruit the day of? Any
Absolutely
tips for our guests?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I highly recommend that because like any salsa or sauce, the longer that you just let it sit and marry in its own flavors, the better it'll kind of, all the flavors will meld together. And then you'll have an even more delicious sauce the next day, and then you can cook up your jackfruit. And this also, by the way, freezes very well. Mm-hmm. So if you needed to freeze either a batch that is already in jackfruit or just the pipián on its own, you can always freeze it and have it ready to go. I use deli cups because that's what we typically have on hand at the kitchen. There's, you know, just like quart containers, or I like to use like the 8 ounce and the 16 ounce. So it's like enough of whatever it is that I want to eat, but not too much where I have to defrost like a whole, you know, 32 quart container and like a huge container. Yeah.
If I'm not going to put it in the freezer, how long would it last in the fridge in one of the containers per se?
You know, this will last in the fridge, I would say like a good 5 to 7 days. The jackfruit alone will last. I've had a friend at the kitchen where I gave them some jackfruit and like 2 weeks later, they were still eating the jackfruit. I was like, are you insane? And he's like, it's still good, you know? The jackfruit will hold a lot longer, the pipián, because it has the onion, garlic. If you add tomato to it, it'll just, it has a shorter shelf life.
Jocelyn, we have about 5 more minutes before we're done, but I have our last question by Jacqueline Valladares. I used to see the green version at Smorgasbord LA. Is this a different one?
Yeah, this is a different one. And the one that I mentioned at Smorgasbord is the one that we make with, again, it has pepitas as a star. We also toast pistachios for that particular pipián verde, and we fire roast excuse me, we fire roast poblanos and jalapenos, and that all gets blended up. So those are fresh chiles versus the pipián rojo, which uses dried guajillo chiles. So the main difference is that the other one calls for pistachios and also uses fresh chiles. Any other questions? I'm gonna warm up a tortilla and make a taco.
The last one is from Vilma. She missed the first 10 minutes. Where do we get the jackfruit?
So the jackfruit you can purchase at most local health food stores. If you have a Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, or another small mom and pop run health food store near you, they're typically in a can or pouches there. There are a couple of online vendors that you can purchase them from. If you have the book in front of you, at the very back of the book, there is online resources or ingredient resources where you can go online and purchase some of these ingredients online. This same list is available if you go to todoverde.org/online classes, because some people who were taking our online classes haven't purchased the book but needed to purchase the ingredients. So I made the list available there as well. And you know, some places like Thrive Market, they ship it directly to your home, so you don't even have to leave at this point. You know, you can stay home, stay safe.
We're wrapping it. We're almost there. Almost there. You go to your tortillas. Real quick, will you be offering more classes in the month of May?
Yes. So throughout the month of May, we're offering classes every Saturday and Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. And the classes are recorded on Zoom. So I know that, you know, we've had some people who say, oh, my kids are awake at that time, I can't attend at 10:30, but we send the recording. So if people register, they can watch the class at any point that fits their schedule. And it's available up to 5 days, the recording is, unless people download it to their computers. And then on Friday evenings, I'm teaching classes via Chef Feed, and those are Friday nights at 6 p.m. But the upcoming classes that we have led by Todo Verde, like our in-house ones, this weekend I'm doing tacos al pastor. I can't remember what the Sunday class is, but I'm doing everything from, I did queso quesadilla last week. I did a pozole verde, just an array of classes, mole, more pipianes, all these different types of classes. And they're all recipes from the cookbook. Any other questions?
Let's see.
Before we wrap it up?
Yeah, we're wrapping it up. Let's see. Thank you, Aurora Luna. Looks delicious. Margarita Nevares. Are these recipes with jackfruit as well? I guess you may talk about the cookbook.
Oh yeah, like the jackfruit al pastor, that one is with jackfruit, but I also like to use a lot of mushrooms. I like to use, just a variety of different ingredients. Tempeh, sometimes I use tofu, but mushrooms and jackfruit are really the stars of my meat alternative dishes. I'm gonna warm up a tortilla hecha a mano that I made. I made a whole batch yesterday, so I'm just gonna reheat one. And one thing I forgot to mention and do is I like to keep a few of the pepitas aside before blending them into the pipián. I got too excited, and they're just for garnish. So when I make this taco, I like to garnish with a few of the toasted pepitas that I toasted earlier, which are all in the sauce now because I forgot. So you can garnish with a little bit of that and some cilantro.
Yep.
Awesome. And you know, the reason that I'm teaching these classes, including the one now, that coincide with the book, is it's just so cool to, you know, you can have the recipe in front of you, but it's a nice additional like perk to have the person who wrote the book with you, and to be able to ask like, well, can I use this as a, you know, substitute or this or that, or what about if I, you know, cook this a little too long, is there a way to recover? And so it's just nice to be able to help people through the dishes.
All right.
No
well,
other questions? We're good?
I think we're good. Well, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Jocelyn. Thank you very much, Jimena.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leonardo's back on here. Oh, this was incredible. I need to go and eat something now. I wish I had some pipián and jackfruit here, but for those who registered, we'll be sending you a thank you note, and we're going to include the recipe. So,
Amazing.
enjoy it and enjoy the book. You have the information for the book, so let's help out Jocelyn here and our food community. Thank you again. I'm just gonna sign off here, but before I do, just ooh.
It's hot too.
Yes, tomorrow is Cinco de Mayo, as you know, so we have a special program for you at 3 o'clock, the same time as today, with David Hayes, Dr. David Hayes Bautista of the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture. He'll be doing a presentation on the real Cinco de Mayo, which isn't as a lot of people have taken it now, but he'll tell us the traditional history of Cinco de Mayo. In the evening, we may have a special guest. Keep tuned to Facebook and all our social media. I may be announcing it in a few by the end of the day, but for sure we have David Hayes Bautista. On Wednesday, we have Stephanie Lauera. She's with La Plaza. She's going to give us some tips on political activism. Incredible things that she and a group of people are doing called the Puro Political Party. So it's having fun while being politically active. And then finally on Friday, we have Dr. Gloria Arjona from Caltech, who will be doing an online history of Loteria, followed by an online Loteria game. So go to our Facebook, go to our website. You'll see all of our classes that we've scheduled so far. You could register them there, and then you could also come on to Facebook and Facebook Live. So thank you again, everybody who attended. Thank you to Jimena and to you, especially Jocelyn.
Thank you, guys.
We'll see you real soon. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Enjoy, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.